Hey YouTube, ShredQuest here.
Hey folks, ShredQuest here. Thanks for joining me on another YT Decoy MX Core 5 unboxing and assembly video. Today we're going to be addressing the seat post. It is a 200mm seat post on this extra large decoy, and it does come with drop reduction shims. I do need to get this seat post lowered into the frame all the way. In order to do that, I am gonna need to pull on the dropper post cable and housing as I lower the seat post. Gravity is not my friend in this case, so I figured laying it on the ground is just the easiest way to go about it. I do have this cushioning on the floor to protect the bike. It's laying on the non-drive side, so there's no issues there. I do want to see if there's any carbon paste in here or any lubrication at all, and then we'll go on from there. This unfortunately looks really dry to me, and I really don't like that at all. I prefer that there's some lubrication in here. I don't typically like carbon paste. I guess my thought about carbon paste is that it's got that very gritty texture. I understand the reasoning behind it. Feel free to put in the comments what the philosophy is around carbon paste and why it's so important or why it's not as necessary as people think it is. The other issue with not having any lubrication between the frame and the seat post, sometimes these seat posts do in fact get stuck and they freeze inside the frame, and it can be incredibly difficult to remove them later. Yeah, let's go ahead and fix this seat post. Trying to get the seat post all the way out of the frame. All right, I'll just put a little in here, just at the top, and I'll go ahead and just put a little on the post itself. Help this thing slide down. Doesn't need to be too much. I am gonna insert this seat post as far as it will go into the frame. Hopefully I can get it all the way down. Let's give this a pull. This is an SDG seat post. Nice. So as you can see, the seat post is able to be inserted all the way into the frame. That's fantastic news. No issues with obstruction. I think at this point it's a good idea to just flip this bike upside down real quick, especially since we have a padded floor. That way we can do the rest of the work in the battery compartment while the bike is turned upside down. Just making sure the cables are clamped appropriately in the battery compartment. There's a little grease from the Thrustmaster 2000 screws inside there. There's one clamp here. Let's make sure that's tight. Don't want any excess inside the frame, any bunch up. Looking good. There are no torque specs on this. Just finger tight is good. Definitely don't want this rattling inside the frame on the downhills. I am using the smallest amount of leverage possible by using the Allen key in this configuration vertically. Don't want to clamp things too hard. That looks good to me. Actually, I think since this bike's already turned upside down, it is just easier to get the wheels in. Take out the caliper inserts. 1.7mm. The rotors are 1.7mm thick. I wish I had 2mm rotors on here. Rotors wear pretty quickly, so I think 2mm is better. They are the HX2 rotors. Just making sure it's clean. There's no debris inside the hub before I slide that axle through. There's a bolt on the fork lower on the drive side where the rebound knob is. That may or may not need to be tightened in a certain order after putting the quick release through. I did have an older Fox 36 that came on a zeroed with a pinion gearbox, and that had screws in the fork lowers that you had to tighten after putting in the axle. The Fox 38 manual that comes with the bike, it's called a pinch bolt. I just couldn't remember the name, but yes, so I did have an old grip 36 factory with double pinch bolts. This one just has a single pinch bolt. So here's the pinch bolt right here on the drive side fork lower, page 6 in the manual. Loosen the pinch bolt, then install the front wheel. So let me first loosen the pinch bolt. It's probably already loosened. Let's make sure it's loosened. The pinch bolt is now loose. What do the instructions say next? So loosen the pinch bolt, then install the front wheel into the fork dropout. So I kind of skipped the step, but it did go right into the fork dropouts. I just haven't put the axle in yet. Slide the axle through the drive side dropout and hub. Okay, about to do that. So you want to loosen that pinch bolt or have it loose. Slide the axle through. You want to tighten the axle, which is a quick release. Then you want to cycle the fork a few times and then tighten that pinch bolt up to 5 Newton meters. You will only need to tighten the pinch bolt during your first wheel installation. After tightening the pinch bolt, you may remove the QR axle and replace it without loosening or retightening the pinch bolt. Okay, so it's likely that it was already set from the factory and I didn't need to do anything. That's fine. I don't mind doing it over again. It's basically settling that wheel into its lowest friction point. I'd frankly rather I redo the pinch bolt setup now so that A, I've done it and I have the experience, but also B, who knows if they actually did it at the factory. Maybe they just received the fork and they're like, okay, the customer's gonna read the manual and do it, etc. There's no way to assume that it has been done already, the pinch bolt setup. I mean, one would think that it was done already because these are supposed to be ride ready. So my bad for not fully reading the manual. Always gets you into trouble, right? I'm just putting a thin layer of grease on this axle. Grease is good. Some on the threads. If you're wondering whether you should grease something, I would say err on the side of caution and definitely apply even just a thin layer of grease. It will help metal on metal contact. I want to inflate the fork and I want to cycle air as I inflate. It helps with air equalization or pressure equalization. Like every 10 PSI, basically cycle the fork 10 times. Also with the shock, you can do the same thing. If you take out all the air in a shock to do any work, then once you fill the shock, just cycle it, 10 times or so on every 10 PSI. A little annoying, I'm getting some rotor rub on this front brake. Let's go ahead and get the rest of this packaging off the bike, get the derailleur installed, get the rear wheel on while the bike is upside down. Remove that rear axle, keep this from falling. All right, set that to a side. Grab some grease. Put a little grease here. When I was purchasing my Orbea Wild 2020 used, I was test riding it around the parking lot and it was creaking from the rear wheel. The owner of the bike didn't know what was causing the creak and I was concerned. I really wanted the Orbea Wild. It only had 500 miles on the engine. It had Axis and it was really nice and it had some Purple Hope components on it and it looked great, and so it was creaking in the rear and I was pretty worried, and all I did was take that rear wheel off and the owner was fine with that. So I took the rear wheel off and I just added a bit of grease to the dropouts in the frame. That fixed the issue. So whenever you have any sort of noise on the bike, you never know. It might just be fixed with some grease. Again, Park Tool grease does not delam carbon any longer, at least. Park Tool, a name you can trust, PPL1. I always do this when I take a rear wheel off. Put in the comments if you think I'm crazy or being too obsessive compulsive, if you feel it's bad. It does help the bike collect more dirt, but if you clean your bike regularly, I don't see a problem. Anyway, I add grease to the dropouts before I slip the rear wheel in every time. If I take it out, I clean everything up back here and then I re-grease. If anything, it just helps me clean the bike more, right? You know, where you get a lot of dirt and grime, of course, is in the linkage pivots. I'm really interested in trying out the DIT drivetrain, but I do wish this was the Axis T-type drivetrain. That's okay. This is still innovative. This bike has the free shift technology. It doesn't have auto shift, and that's a little perplexing. It seems like if it's just a firmware issue and it's not a cost issue, I don't know why YT wouldn't include the auto shift. I heard on one of the videos on YouTube that YT believed that auto shift was slower, less reactive than the speed that mountain bikers could shift. So they included free shift, but they didn't include auto shift. But if you can disengage auto shift, it seems like they should have just included it. Oh well, what do I know? Let's get this bad boy on. This looks crazy. I don't know what this is. Huh. Is it supposed to fit in there? Time to read the manual again. So I'll show you guys what I'm talking about here. So I was starting to get a little frustrated because of this extra piece right here. Online, I found an article that has an actual schematic on it that shows this is the correct way to mount it, just like that. So I'll torque that to about 10 Newton meters. The other weird thing is that this derailleur hanger seems a bit loose, so I'm gonna try and tighten that, or at least check to make sure it's tightened. It's supposed to be at 25 Newton meters. It just seems like it's rocking a little bit too much. There's still some things to do. As you can see, I haven't attached the cable yet to the rear derailleur, but I did check the torque of everything. Everything's looking good. I just had to figure out the orientation of how to mount that to the UDH. Again, would have been so much simpler, I think, just to get a SRAM T-type drivetrain. EXO would be my preference, but that's fine. Again, down to try Shimano and interested to see how it works. The clutch is disengaged right now. I have used Shimano drivetrains in the past. Shimano stuff is great. I'm not sure how to register this on the Shimano website, if there is such a process. When you get a bike with SRAM, you can go on the SRAM website and register all your parts. So if something goes wrong, you can just create a ticket with SRAM. If you need service or a warranty replacement or something, I've gotten 3 Axis reverb posts replaced since buying my Capra Uncaged 6. There'd be like 5 millimeters of sag over time, or scoring is another big issue, scoring on the stanchion. I already put grease on the axle, and now we just need to get this installed. Easier said than done. That's looking okay. A little scraping on the rotors. Hopefully that'll go away once I put the axle in. You're probably super annoyed at me for treating this bike with such kid gloves. I don't blame you. Like I said, I'm kind of OCD when it comes to mechanics. I go slowly and carefully. I'll take that dork disc off later once I've determined that the shifting and the rear derailleur is set up properly. Finally got that in the threads. I kind of wish this wasn't a quick release axle. It doesn't have Newton meters on it, so literally you're just supposed to, you know, hand tighten it. I don't like that. I want to be able to torque everything down to spec. Other quick release rear axles I've had, the little like handle pulls out and you can rotate it for a certain orientation, but it looks okay right now. Little rotor rub on there. Looks more like a bent rotor issue than anything else though. I think it's right here. There we go. Wheels straight, thank God. All right, let's go ahead and get the pedals on. By the way, the race face crank boots fit absolutely perfectly on the XT crank arms. I already greased up the threads a bit. I use Crank Brother mallet e-pedals. When I was using XT pedals, I had a foot pop off while night riding at Water Dog. I was going down 3 bitches. My foot popped out, so I put my foot down to dab. It was night, and my foot got caught on the bank of the hill, and it got snapped back, so I broke my leg that way. After that, I just stopped riding XTs altogether. I did overhaul these mallet e-pedals recently, and they're spinning pretty nice. You know when they need to be overhauled because they make a rattly noise when you spin them. Pro tip. Also, one other note on this pinch bolt and this quick release skewer. It says specifically in the Fox 38 manual that you should have a depression in your hand after tightening down the quick release lever. So it is now parallel to the fork lower as I normally prefer. And there is even a way to adjust the lever position on the axle, but it did say you should use force when tightening that down. I can't see any obvious issues. After I inflate this fork, I'll go back and tighten this down to 6 Newton meters. I just need to connect this power cable. Pro tip, never throw out these rotor spacers that come with the bike. You can reuse these, they're really important, especially if you get new rotors in the future. You can use these and insert them into your calipers to space your brake pads. So these are 1.7 millimeter, so these are for the Mavens. Look at how low the stack height is, that's crazy. Even with the 50 mil riser bar on there, Oh, I forgot the fork is not inflated. I keep forgetting that that is affecting the stack height. Right now, I'm just attaching the dropper lever to the matchmaker. I'm not sure the position. That actually feels too far away. Brake position is pretty much how I like it, with my hand at the end of the grip, sort of touching this outside metal lock ring. I like the position of the brake lever set up for single pull. I'm gonna go ahead and inflate this fork. That's like 10 PSI right there. Cycling the fork every 10 PSI or so. Go ahead and go up to 90, just to be safe, because the fork does feel better the more air I put in it. We'll check that pressure later. Felt a bit of stiction when I was filling it up. That feels pretty good. I'm gonna go ahead and tighten that pinch bolt. Depress it a little. That was the instructions. Compress the fork a couple of times to ensure that the lower leg has settled into its low friction point. Tighten the pinch bolt on the drive side dropout to 5.1 Newton meters of torque. So, and it says important, you will only need to tighten the pinch bolt during your first wheel installation. After tightening the pinch bolt, you may remove the QR axle and replace it without loosening or retightening the pinch bolt. If you're changing wheels or hubs, it is likely that the pinch bolt will need to be adjusted by following these installation instructions starting at step 1. My torque wrench only goes in even increments. I'll set it midway between 4 and 6. And that's it. Pinch bolt achieved. Now the other thing you'll notice, beyond the position of the seat being a little funky, I'll change that in a sec, is that the stack height of the front end is now even. So before I was complaining about stack height, but I had forgotten that the fork had no air in it yet. Everything looks better with air in the fork. The front brake hose, for example, looks a lot longer without air in the fork. Let's go ahead and adjust air pressure in the shock. Again, I'm gonna cycle this every 10 PSI or so. It's at 160 right now. I'm gonna do this to about 230 to start. I've run an X2 before, a float X2, although it was older, but it was about 230 for my weight. We'll check sag later. Why don't you let me know in the comments how you like to inflate your fork and your shock. That's 230. I'll just put in a few extra PSI. Now, I've heard varying opinions on this. My thought is that this pump has volume. There's like a cylinder in it, and there's chambers in it. And this has volume, this hose, right? There's empty space in here. So once you connect something that has volume, it only seems logical to me that air will be expelled from the suspension that you're trying to inflate and fill the voids. It'll fill this pump that has volume, empty space. And then you inflate the suspension. You can't release this thing quick enough to have that Schrader plunger reset and not let any air out. I believe air escapes when you're disconnecting the shock pump. There's different opinions of this. That is not what happens, and that you should only inflate to what's displayed on the pump. However, I really feel like air escapes when you're trying to rapidly disconnect this pump that also has volume. When I disconnect, I'm always holding down the plunger, and I'm trying to disconnect as rapidly as possible so that the least amount of air escapes. I've tested this theory out in the past. I'll fill up a shock, for example, to like 235, and then I'll immediately go back and do it again. I'll disconnect the pump, and then I'll reconnect the pump, and the pump is reading like 225. Logically, in my mind, that could only be reading less PSI because air is escaping as this Schrader plunger is being depressed. Why don't you let me know in the comments what you think? Is my theory complete garbage? Should you always just inflate to the manufacturer's recommended specs exactly to what's displayed on the pump? Or should you overinflate a little to compensate for connections and disconnections of the pump? Let me know in the comments. The Orbea Wild has these frame arms that obstruct the vertically mounted X2 shock. I have the 2020 model. In the newer iterations of the Orbea Wild, those frame arms that they say are for stiffness in the frame, they're a bit lower in the newer Orbea Wild iterations. However, in the model I had, they were higher, and it was very difficult to get the shock pump chuck screwed onto the Schrader valve on the X2 shock. It's super nice having a bike with an X2 shock that is so easily accessible. Right now I'm just installing a couple of AirTag holders. I actually run these same two on my Capra. There's varying opinions on whether or not these are good or they actually clue in thieves, because you can get them to emit a sound and people can see them, you know, if they have an iPhone in proximity. So there's varying opinions on the effectiveness of AirTags. I haven't had any issues running these AirTags on my Capra, so I figure better safe than sorry in this case. If you are interested in removing the little speaker in the AirTag, there are YouTube videos on how to do that, how to disassemble the AirTag and actually remove the little speaker that emits sound. This is a headset AirTag holder, and this just essentially goes where the top cap normally goes. So you have a couple options. You can either put on this fake beer cap, which I just think looks really fake. I mean, no beer bottle has a cap that large anyway. It just looks too obvious. What I did on my Capra was I just put this basic flat plastic one on, and then I just cut out one of the YT stickers in a circle that matches this diameter. The next AirTag holder I use is under the seat. This one comes with various spacers so you can attach it to different rails. It just sits in your bike seat, attaches to the rails. I haven't had any problems with either of these two AirTag holders on my Capra, so I got them for the e-bike, and they're cheap. I'll try and put the links in the description. They're pretty handy. Pro tip: before you put the AirTag in the headset AirTag holder, you want to get a little piece of painter's tape, fold over just one edge of it. In audiovisual production, this is called a happy ending. So just affix that painter's tape to the top of the AirTag. That way, if you're on a ride and you have to tighten a loose headset or something, you can easily pull this AirTag out. After several hours of dicking around with this bike, fine-tuning the cockpit setup and installing the AirTags, all the parts I got for the bike have been installed. All the electrical cables from the various electronics on board have been attached to the control unit. The rear derailleur cable was attached. I haven't ridden this thing at all. I haven't even turned it on. The battery is now charging finally. The suspension has all been inflated. Sag has not been determined yet. I haven't even sat on this bike on the seat yet. We'll need to determine, you know, all the suspension setup and tuning as much as we can. The brakes, the right Maven, I had to pressurize it. I don't know if that's going to be a problem yet. You pressurize a brake after it's been bled, for example, or something, or maybe it was sitting upside down, right, while I was putting parts on, then I flipped it over, and then I was pulling on the brake lever and it was pressurizing. I was playing around with the contact adjustment, bite point, basically, and, you know, trying to dial that in a little bit. If I come tomorrow morning, for example, is the brake lever going to be spongy on me? If it is, I honestly hate bleeding brakes. I can do it, I've done it before, but I really don't like it. SRAM brakes are very finicky, so I've been trying as much as possible to like just pay for a shop to bleed the brakes. That way it's also under warranty. The unfortunate thing about the shop is that you can't just take the part off and bring it to the shop and still keep your bike. That's the only downside there. Hopefully that right lever is gonna be okay. The right master cylinder. The left master cylinder was fine, but the brakes do feel good. The rotors, HS2, they're okay. 1.7 millimeter thickness rotors, they're already warped. Rotors are always warped, man. That's why I like those thick rotors, the 2 millimeters. I got the Galfer E-Wave rotors for my Capra. It took me a little while, like right out of the box, to spread the pistons back to accept the 2 millimeter width rotors. But man, that was the clutch system when I had the bike new. So 1.7 millimeter, whatever, those are deficient, too thin in my book. Like e-bike rotors should always be 2 millimeters. You're gonna wear through the rotor thickness pretty quick there. Pinch bolt was tightened. Basically all the bolts I've made sure are torqued correctly. The seat post C-post cable housing. It actually dressed up fairly nicely on the front end. YT includes these plastic branded little cable tie things that join the two cables together. So of course, as you're shredding trails and the bike is like bouncing and moving all over the place, these little plastic cable things tend to move around. My nice cable dressing will probably not be that nice for very long. That's why RockShox's Axis reverb posts are so nice. You just don't have to mess with any of the cables, man. I found one online for $500 that I could have bought for this bike, but $500 is a lot to spend when I'm already paying a monthly payment for this bike. This seat post is a SDG Tellus V2. So it is branded SDG on the little cartridge where you connect the cable underneath, and YT confirmed in an email that they are SDG posts. So it's just YT branded, right? They have some agreement with SDG. The action, it's okay. The action on the RockShox Reverb is much better than this SDG, but it's cable actuated. This Postman lever is got, man, some smooth action. It's really light. I don't know if I really like it. I know you want a really smooth mechanical lever for a cable actuated seat post, but I'm just used to the nice firm like button press of the Axis Reverb on my Capra. So everything else is pretty good. I can't wait to get out. Battery's charging. In the next video, what I'm gonna have to do is, well, put the battery in, and I'm going to have to attempt to at least, switch some gears. You can't, the other bad thing about the XT-Di2 system is that obviously you cannot change gears at all without power. Same thing with SRAM Axis, obviously. At least on the Axis system, you have a little battery and a battery in the controller. You don't actually need power from a battery inside the frame. I actually came out virtually with the same reach, measuring from the end of the saddle to the front edge of this AirTag holder on the headset. The seat is about as far as it can go on the rails forward, and it's this exact same reach as my Capra. On my Capra, I got a 170 seat post slammed in the frame. This is a 200 slammed in the frame. I'm hoping that it'll generally work and that I may be able to just get by removing this rubber dust seal that YT provides. That would give me 5 millimeters of drop, but it's okay if I have to lower the drop on the seat. Thanks so much for joining me today on this video. Really appreciate all your support, your subscriptions, the likes, comments. I appreciate all the advice, observations even. I'll catch you on the next video. Peace out.